Welcome everyone to Team Rabbit Edition 271, once again with Colin Smith. It is the Hivemind Invasion of Civilization. Welcome and well met.
So 12th house in Gemini, Mercury, like you're channeling, with conjunct Venus, you're channeling the puns, the riddles of the fucking Matrix. I don't even understand. So where does this book lead you in some ways? Like ontologically, do you think we're just like in a snow globe being like, held prisoner, or how do you feel about reality?
Surprisingly, I'm like one of the least people to, like fully subscribe to all of the artificial AI simulated Matrix, although like this book is literally like more evidence for that than you'll ever find like anywhere else. I mean, it's like the conclusive, like essentially proof, if you could consider it. Of course, in reality, there's no such thing as actual proof. It's just you have points of evidence. And I mean, this is like all the evidence you could ever even imagine for that. But even with all of that,
knock out atheism. It's like, look, this is pretty well designed game we're in, whatever that is.
Yes, it absolutely, as with most of my stuff, as you guys know, like most of it just happens to be like atheism is not even a valid, perspective to hold. I mean, unless you're just totally ignorant of literally just about everything in the universe, as far as like universal physics, cosmology, everything else on top of that we know of, is such as, any type of, theology or any type of philosophy in general. I mean, it just totally rules out atheism. But this is the empirical hard physics, nothing but hard science, hard physics, like the in-depth. It's nothing but geometric mathematics. It's pure mathematics. It's pure sacred geometry, which nobody can argue with. It's the examples. It's here. It's conclusive. It's proven. The sort of ambiguity about it is, what does it all mean? Essentially, like what is this? It's proof that there is a geometric. It's a matrix that we're a part of. But the question is, and I summarized that in the synopsis, is whether it's artificial or whether it's just organic.
Never feel like the Rams. Oh, this is why we fucking get you on here, bro. This is gold. And I thought of something while you were talking about this. If you ever get shit from people being like, "Oh, this is an original," be like, "I'm a fucking esoteric curator. I'm creating the Louvre of thought here. Fuck all y'all."
What I was gonna say is, like, that argument is so weak and literally invalid. All right. Good to be back.
Yeah, it's been a hot fucking minute.
Yeah,
I'm glad you're alive and kicking. We'll get caught up in everything, but you know how we kind of roll here. 271 is going to reduce down to 10. Sorry for all these noises. Reduce down to 10, which is 1 essentially, and that would be the Starman, which is actually the cover of this deck. The Starman says, "I will blow your mind." The Starman is the alchemist. It's about manifesting your reality. Ideas are communicated and brought into the physical world with ease. You have everything you need to create the world you desire. Reconfigure yourself in.
Oh, Jim, you somehow muted yourself just in the last 5 seconds. I'm not sure what you did, Jim. Can you try talking again?
You went dark.
I know. I don't know what happened, because it didn't do the intro, but now it was trying to do the intro. So the internet here is just not awesome for that. So did you hear the card or no?
Yeah, we heard everything except the last.
Starman. How poignant, because that's actually a part of this chapter of my book, is about gets into the geometry of the Starman, and as well as the symbolism of 2001 Space Odyssey, the Star Child, the Starman, the geometry of the human being, essentially the metaphorical Starman, but as well as the theme in sci-fi of the Starman, the man transcending earthly endeavors and ascending to the heavens, essentially apotheosis of humankind, becoming the transcending this reality and becoming multi-dimensional pure star beings. Again, for anyone, I'm sure people familiar with Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 Space Odyssey knows about the firstborn, the whole themes. I mean, it's just how synchronistic.
That's how it rolls, apparently. Yeah, you're not even surprised. I don't know if you've seen Neon Evangelion, the anime, but there's kind of Kabbalistic apotheosis in that. 2001: A Space Odyssey does really good fourth wall kind of breakage where it's like, holy shit, as within, so without kind of thing. Raphael, before we start jumping too hard on things, did you pull a card or no?
Oh, that's one of the tricky ones, but it's a good one. This is the Queen of Swords. The one symbolism that always comes to mind is, I believe there is a Van Gogh tarot, or I'm completely making this up now. No, Dali tarot or something along those lines. And what you have for this card is like a flame and a moth going around the flame. Queen of Swords, 52-7.
It's funny because the moon is in Virgo. It's a full moon tomorrow night, basically in Virgo. Probably mid-afternoon for you, Raphael. I think evening for us, or early morning, something. I don't remember the exact time. But Virgo is the Queen of Swords, so I think we're going to be getting down to the nitty-gritty, talking about a whole lot of interesting deets. I mean, one of the reasons we ever got you on the podcast, Colin, is because of that kind of shit you're pulling out of that book. It's because I was like, bro, you're always bringing in the symbology and the heavy esoterica, but making it relatively digestible. You don't have to be a fucking 33-degree Mason to get this shit. Spoiler, we've had a Master Mason on the podcast, and what you're doing and what we're talking about is basically what they're all about anyway. We'll get into the book. But let's pull back a second. It's been almost, I think, 2 years possibly since you've been on. It's been a while.
Yeah, I think it's been before. It was before COVID, I believe, or maybe it was right at the beginning of.
I think it was right at the beginning, because you were on the Human Zoo episode with a few people, and we were just talking about like where I think it's going to go, and it was kind of a hodgepodge of ideas and stuff. And I didn't get enough of your opinions on that. It was like Steve Wilner and Corey Kaplan and a few other people maybe, but it's been a while. I mean, that was like March 2020, like maybe May or something like that. But yeah, let's fill us in on what you've been up to for the past 2 years, and we'll get eventually into your publication.
Well, during that time, obviously, I ended up publishing the book. It started out as one of my really long, like 150-page plus sync articles that was basically just like, started off a couple pages, and then more and more, syncs start happening in reality and everything. So as always, I go, my work is progressing constantly because there's new things that fit, pieces that fit into the puzzle. So I just keep accumulating, and then eventually, I don't know what it was the Disney Plus series WandaVision came out. And when WandaVision came out,
I haven't.
The show sucked.
You can spoil it all you want.
Yeah,
but
it sucked. I mean, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but like as far as like, entertainment quality goes, like the show itself sucked. But there was, in fact, I mean, it's like there wasn't, the story was terrible and all of that sucked. The only reason, in my opinion, why the show even existed was to produce the heavy esoteric occult symbolism in it. That's all it was. Like there was they're really good, pop culture analysis channels out there that I am a big fan of. Nerdrotic, The Critical Drinker, Heel versus Babyface, and Geeks and Gamers, all these channels that I really like a lot. I support them. They do pop culture analysis, but they mostly do just comic book they're big comic book
I'm gonna have to hit those guys up to get on the show. But before we
they're great.
Give me a little. I mean, I've watched all the Marvel movies in 2020, actually, like all 28 of them or whatever it was, in sequence, which was kind of, it took a month. I did it during Leo season. I was like, I gotta be a hero. Yeah, let's do this. And I was like, I'll try to get all the fucking downloads I can. But I didn't give a fuck about that thing. But tell us how it was esoteric. I mean, you don't have to give us play by play, but like, what was it? What were some of the main themes that it was hitting on that you saw as resonant?
So that's what got me to revisit this whole Hivemind Invasion of Civilization article that I wrote. And I mean, it was mostly about cubic symbolism, the cubic wave fields of space and time. essentially, and the reason why this relates to Hivemind Invasion of Civilization, because it ties in all the themes of. So you get the cubic symbolism. That's obviously the honeycomb. That's the geometry of, obviously, the hexagonal geometry of what bees, build. In other words, the bee. So this ties heavily into the ancient esoteric traditions of Freemasonry. Freemasonry evolves around essentially sort of like a reverence for the bee colony, for the colony, the hive, because of their immense skill in constructing the sacred geometrical universal structure. They basically just pull. They're essentially they're a hive mind. They're drones, and the way they build their hive structures, their honeycomb structures, essentially they're just making the energetic structure of space and time, and they're just building on that. That's what the honeycomb structure is.
On a smaller level. I know they're showing, it, and that's how they're making the wax combs and the honey. I mean, basically, the sweet honey is their barf or whatever. Yep. But I'm vegan, but I still do honey. I love honey. As long as they're like ethically helped, it's like I don't care.
Yeah, a lot of people do. A lot of people do honey as well. I mean, especially the Manuka honey, and they're like, oh, it's super healthy and healing and all that. The truth is that's actually all a huge myth. It's actually not healthy whatsoever. They're the only healthy sweeteners that are out there is actually date sugar, because it's literally nothing but just ground up powdered whole dates. You just take whole dates, ground them up, and that's actually a real deal. It's a whole food, so that's why it's healthy. The only other one is blackstrap molasses. So those are the only two healthy sweeteners. Everything else is literally just empty calories. Honey is actually less healthy because it's bee vomit, so it's still animal protein. And again, animal proteins are actually carcinogenic, but that's the very last couple pages. The last chapter is hive keeping, the symbol of slavery, regarding why the bee colonies and why it's the hive mind is essentially hive keeping is essentially the archetype of slavery. The beekeeper is the slave master, the ultimate slave master. Essentially, this is why the Freemasons, revolve around the hive keeping, because the hive keeper is essentially it's like an allegory for God. Like we are the bees in the colony, and God is the hive keeper, essentially. But not only that, literally beekeeping is actual slavery. I mean, it's horribly exploitative for the bees. But I'm not one of these people. I'm like, oh my God, the bees.
Oh no, not the bees, not the bees. Oh my eyes!
They got to do something with their time, I guess. So I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of honey. Is honey vegan? Like I said, that's one point.
Honey is not vegan.
Well, we can get into the health stuff in a second, but I'm curious what your perspective is on colonization. I know bees are integral to our whole food supply chain. So yes, there may be a model of hive minded control and stuff, but they seem to be critical to our functional being here as animal people things or whatever.
Essentially all of life and biology on Earth. I mean, the pollinators are the ones they're the intermediary that make all of plant life, which essentially all of the food chain. The whole ecology revolves. Is dependent on the pollinators, so not just the bees, but there's other like wasps or somewhat pollinators as well. But yes.
So WandaVision was hitting hard on the beehive cubic.
Not necessarily on the bee. There was one key scene that literally had no significance to the plot or to the story, but yet it was very prominent scene, and I've got it on one of the pages here. Let's see on which page. I'm not sure which page, but it showed there was symbolically there was a beekeeper that went into. So the whole plot of the show was all about nothing but hexagonal geometry, hexagonal cubic wave fields, plasma physics, essentially just nothing but sacred geometry. And the reason why is because the Scarlet Witch herself, Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, essentially, you know, one of her main powers derives from chaos magic. She's what's considered a nexus being in the Marvel universe, which are essentially they're a few of the most powerful beings in the Marvel universe. There's only a couple nexus beings. So one of them being her, the other is Kang the Conqueror. I don't know much about comic book lore, except I've dived into this because it's relevant to like all this heavy esoterica. And as we know, like a lot of the comic book writers and like the really good ones were extremely heavy into occultism and esoterica, and that's why they're, you know, really good. If they're really good storytellers, you know, that's why they are, is because, you know, they pay a lot of attention and respect for ancient mythology, ancient esoterica and occultism, which is what makes the stories interesting, but also somewhat, you know, pretty reliant on actual real world physics and things like that, which makes the story compelling. Like the ones that don't have any of that, they're just like the modern, you know, SJW type shit. It's garbage. Like it's just garbage, nothing but identity politics and, you know, what your sexuality is and what your gender is. Nobody gives a shit about any of that. Like nobody cares about that stuff. But so yeah, the whole show, like that's what kicked off. Like I had to go back. I was like, oh my god, like it was that mind blowing moment. Like I saw the first couple episodes and the symbolism throughout the show, and it was just like, oh my god. So I immediately pulled up my article, and it was just, it turned into a book, like out of nowhere, just because of how deeply symbolic it was. And again, it even tied into it. Was, I already had this thing written, and then the show comes along like as if they had, like, you know, pulled it directly out of my own mind and everything. But of course, the work, you know, that I compiled in here, it's a compendium of esoteric, you know, symbolism and universal science. So it obviously those secrets have been out there.
What you were doing for the past few years in terms of posts and kind of symbology, and then it happened, like you're saying, to sync up and resonate with the zeitgeist enough where you were like, shit, now it's time to pull the trigger.
Like on a whole other level, dude. So yeah, like here was one of the significant key scenes at the beginning of the show. Towards the beginning, the first couple episodes is so like the whole plot is Wanda creates her own. She essentially manifests. So that's what her main power is with the chaos magic. And in the Marvel comics, it's also is referred to as hex magic, of course, because we know witches. You know, their witchcraft, their powers is called hexing spells, casting hexes. So of course, that's what the whole theme.
Resonance there a little.
Of course, that's what the whole theme of the show.
Just briefly,
and hers.
In German, you literally call a witch is a hexe. Hexe.
A hexa? Hexa?
Yeah. So,
H-E-X-E-E?
Yes. H-E-X-E. But
Hexa.
hex in the very beginning, so yeah. Witch is hexe, so definitely connected, whatever it means exactly, yeah. Exactly.
And but yeah, so I mean, in the book, I cover all the deep, like the details, why it's, you know, why it is a hex. What is the hex? What's the significance of the hex? Which is one of how the show starts off, one of the main themes. So first they sort of slowly, the first 3 episodes, they do like, the whole show is like they're going back, and it starts from going back in time from like old sitcom style. It's like a sitcom style. They're sort of making fun of like I Love Lucy, you know, Malcolm in the Middle, these old, you know, these sitcom hit shows. And it's a manifestation that she creates her own reality. And in this reality that she creates, because that's why she's one of the most powerful beings in the universe, is because she can create absolutely anything out of nothing, just out of the substance, the fabric of the universe itself. That's why she's so powerful. She can destroy anything, she can create, and she can even create life just out of her pure life energy, her pure essence, essentially her, you know. And so she's a nexus being. That in itself is symbolic of this whole like thing, the tapestry. A nexus is it's a junction.
Convergence points.
It's a convergence point in literally the fabric of the fabric of space and time. It's a nexus point, or in other words, in the Marvel universe, between a multiverse, between multiple realities, multiple dimensions, which is the whole theme of where the Marvel universe is into multidimensionality themes. That's what this Phase 4 is supposed to be all about. The next Doctor Strange movie is supposed to be a really big one. Looks pretty good, surprisingly, because everything they put out for the past couple of years is crap.
And the past Spider-Man, the last Spider-Man that just came out, No Way Home, I guess.
It was great.
Alert, I didn't love it, but I like where it's going. I mean, I'm not a big Spider-Man fan particularly, so I didn't really give a shit like in that level. I'm more Iron Man, Doctor Strange. But really, actually, just Infinity War. It's like all of the shit led up to that cool shit. But in any event, it's cool. Do you see it as life imitating art, imitating life? Do you think this is how we, do we have to write the stories and read ourselves into them, kind of Arthur C. Clarke style, where it's like, holy shit, we are the Star Child. How do you look at this?
Never-ending story style.
I just read that book, ironically, with my fiance, and it's really good. I was surprised. The movie did a good job of trying to stay true to it, considering it's like, an hour movie.
I forget his name, but the author, he was a long practicing theosophist. So it's full of it's full of actual, really meaningful, messages and symbolic archetypes of the Atreyu. It goes through that's a huge part of some of my works, is the 101, the gateway of initiation. That's what Atreyu goes through, the two sphinxes. That's the gateway of initiation in Freemasonry. It's the 101. The 101, of course, is literally, it's the number of initiation. We take a 101 course when we are entering into that
project of
field of study. It's always been. So it's the gateway. It's the twin pillars with the gateway in the center, and so it goes through, and you have, of course, you get blown to bits. Like if you don't pass the initiation, in other words, by the quality of your heart, it's essentially like the gates of Maat in ancient Egypt. Where you have your heart weighed upon the scales of judgment. The scales are the twin pillars, and your heart is the gateway at the center. So it's all these themes. But yeah, he was well. Good practicing theosophist with great messages and great stories as a result, because you pay homage to the timeless the timeless formula, and you will create a classic, which is not what our modern these SJW progressive liberal writers are now doing. Now it's nothing but identity politics, nothing but gender and and sexuality. In other words, are you gay and are you black and female? That's all they freaking care about. Literally, I wish it wasn't that blunt and that basic, but it really is. Like they've taken away that. But
do you feel there's a time for that to be under the sun? Okay, so this gets tricky. We can get into culture, politics, and wars and stuff.
I don't necessarily want to go down that path, but
okay, we don't have to. So let's keep talking about, because it seems like just like the Zodiac, everything has a moment under the sun, and I guess some of these groups have felt disenfranchised or whatever for long enough, and they're like, hey, we want our voice heard or our story told. But the way that's happening sometimes is more, like you're saying, social justice warrior kind of.
And Jim, I think you yourself know that that's not really the reason, and we don't have to talk about it much. But this is completely pushed and controlled confusion of humanity and nothing else, And it even infects the video game industry. And not that this is too important, but it's kind of interesting to anyone who ever played any games and maybe similar to our age may know of Blizzard, for example. And I haven't really been following them or playing their games or whatever, but it seems they're like top tier of, molesting their own employees whilst at the same time doing completely BS, SJW, destroying
virtue signaling. Yeah. Virtue
It's
signaling about, believe all women. And there's all these channels I was mentioning earlier, Nerdrotic, Geeks and Gamers, all that, they cover all those stories as they break, as it's breaking. Like, I don't pay too much attention to like the video game stuff, unless like it's like, just really interesting like hypocrisy that comes out, which it always is. Like, oh my, the level of hypocrisy is insane. It's just like government. It's exactly what they're virtue signaling about is the very thing that they themselves, the executives and the employees, are the most guilty of. It's like the Facebook employees.
It's like classic projection. It's pretty boring, actually.
Yeah. I mean, like, they're just textbook, like blatant projection, like of the highest level. But yeah, that's aside from the point.
All of mirrors, all up in here. It's funny. We don't have to go off on too much. I know that like things like Ghostbusters, I think, maybe it was Ghostbusters 2, but that was getting into like opening portals, kind of like the one initiation, but different.
Exactly.
And this gets into the transhuman agenda and kind of a Luciferian agenda, so to speak. So we could go down that rabbit hole in a bit, but I want to hear more about. So you got inspired by. I mean, it was almost not. It was a culmination of your work being triggered to be released by the zeitgeist, essentially. What are some other themes that show was tapping on, or do you want to start reading maybe some of the chapter titles of the book, or whatever is in there, and we can kind of go through it?
Well,
we don't have to go through it all. I know it's large, but it's like if there's some like real things that you think are pertinent to either our show now or the zeitgeist, feel free.
Yeah, it's is it 12 chapters or 13? Either way, it's a kind of that I didn't intend for that, but it happened to turn out to be, I think it's 12 chapters. I forget. It's the Supreme Intelligence, the Tessellated Matrix, Universal Hexing, Squaring the Circle, or in other words, again, the circle. Sudoku, squaring the sun and cubing the sphere. That's sort of just a play on words, essentially like squaring the circle, but squaring the circle is obviously 2 dimensions. It's like cubing the sphere is 3-dimensional. So it's taking the theme from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, because space is obviously space and time is 3-dimensional or more, however you want to do it. Then it goes specifically into the cube of space. In other words, the Paul Foster Case wrote a lot about that, the Hebraic cube of space. It's
heroic making it, I think. I vaguely recall Paul. Yeah, he was like, these cards are here.
The 22 major arcana correspond with it. There's 22 paths of the Kabbalah correspond with. There's 22, I think, axes of a cube. I forget when you have axes on the inside of the cube. I forget exactly how it works off the top of my head, but then it gets into more of like the conspiratorial, tying in there, the Hivemind Invasion. That's a chapter that ties in exactly how all of these very popular, very well-loved, well-known, like sci-fi, whether it's, novels, movies, TV shows, whatever, all of these, they all have the same exact theme. They all heavy cube symbolism, heavy, the same themes of transhumanism, but teleportation between dimensions, essentially through time and space. All the hex is the hexagram, the cube of space is literally the key to all of those stories, and it's heavily woven throughout all of those stories. The Transformers, you have the Allspark cube. So I go through all the examples of those. I just compile one after another and sync it all together, so it's a perfect tapestry that's weaved together. The criticisms of this book is that I'm just compiling stuff that's already out there, and it's nothing original. I'm like, it's like that's like criticism.
Well, Colin, that's one Amazon review because I just checked them. Other people seem to like it, so
Don't focus on that. It'll
so maybe you may want to try the spell check. I'm not sure if that's a real actual thing, but that's something manageable.
I went back and like revised it like 3 different times because there were some errors, so I went back and revised it and fixed all the spelling and all that. But
you didn't have your own editor or anything, right? So if it's all up
I didn't rely on any other editor. In fact, because part of it is, y'all know, like the way I do the wordplay and all that stuff. Like most of it is intentional. Sort of the way I spell things and the grammar and stuff, and like capitalizing things for emphasis of the syncs that I want to stick in your mind, because I capitalize it and highlight the things that I want you to those are the threads that, the nexus points that you got to weave together as you're reading. And then it pops back up in your mind. You're like, oh, I remember that from the beginning. Oh my God, it ties all the way back in, because like,
never doubt your Mercury. You've got a 12th house Mercury conjunct Venus. You are able to like have like
in Gemini
and stuff like that. Yeah, in Gemini. That's what I forgot to say. Correct. So 12th house in Gemini, Mercury. Like you're channeling with conjunct Venus. You're channeling the puns, the riddles of the fucking matrix? I don't even understand. So where does this book lead you in some ways? Like ontologically, do you think we're just like in a snow globe being like, held prisoner, or how do you feel about reality?
Surprisingly, I'm like one of the least people to, like fully subscribe to all of the artificial AI simulated matrix, although like this book is literally like more evidence for that than you'll ever find like anywhere else. I mean, it's like the conclusive, like essentially proof, if you could consider it. Of course, in reality, there's no such thing as actual proof. It's just you have points of evidence. And I mean, this is like all the evidence you could ever even imagine for that. But even with all of that,
knock out atheism. It's like, look, this is pretty well designed game we're in, whatever that is.
Yes, it absolutely, as with most of my stuff, as you guys know, like most of it just happens to be like atheism is not even a valid perspective to hold. I mean, unless you're just totally ignorant of literally just about everything in the universe, as far as like universal physics, cosmology, everything else on top of that we know of, such as any type of theology or any type of philosophy in general. I mean, it just totally rules out atheism. But this is the empirical hard physics, nothing but hard science, hard physics. Like the in-depth, it's nothing but geometric mathematics. It's pure mathematics. It's pure sacred geometry, which nobody can argue with. It's the examples. It's here. It's conclusive. It's proven. The sort of ambiguity about it is, what does it all mean? Essentially, like what is this? It's proof that there is a geometric. It's a matrix that we're a part of. But the question is, and I summarize that in a synopsis, is whether it's artificial or whether it's just organic. So we know that it's highly intelligent design. It is literally it's an algorithm. I mean, it's pure mathematics. It's pure phi ratio, sacred geometry. It's pure physics and math. I mean, that's what it is. So the question is, who designed it?
Chicken or egg kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. I was looking at your chart really briefly.
It's one of the big points on the chapters also is about the cosmic egg and the cosmic ego.
The oral nature of it. I mean, that's one of the points of Never-Ending Story. It's all about these serpents, then they're kind of doing their thing. Raphael, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts on anything he said so far are. I mean, maybe nothing you're going to be like, what specifically? And I'm like, nothing necessarily. We're kind of getting to the end of the question at the very beginning where it's like, what is all this? But looking at your chart, you have your Mars and North Node, which is like your Dharma, if you want to put it that way, like the karmic destiny for you in this lifetime, is in Pisces, which is Pisces season now. So it's not surprising we're kind of talking to you now. But it's in 10th house. It's in about structure and order and reason, because you're one of the people that one of the reasons that I'm attracted to your thinking is you dip into some of the most esoteric, crazy woo stuff, but you're not lightheaded about it. Like, you're actually very grounded and reasonable. And I mean, we've had you on the show before, and we've talked about things where it's not like you outright scoffed at these things, more QAnon kind of stuff, but it's like you're very more reasonable than not. So it seems like this compendium of yours would be something that you don't have to just be into new age kind of thinking. It's maybe a good entry point for mathematician, philosopher types who are maybe wanting to grok a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole, so to speak. But yeah, I'm going to have to check it out for sure. Raphael, if you wanted to say anything, you totally can. I say you're on screen now.
Yeah, well, so for some strange reason, I actually read Michael Ende's, how is it in German, Die Eternal Story, Unendliche Geschichte. I read it in primary school during breaks. Don't ask me why. I'm not even claiming I understood much of it. I just remember it's pretty cool imagery and, a crazy story. Aside from that, what I find interesting, or it's also my conclusion, and, who can be certain of anything, but I would very much agree that whilst there is so much evidence that shows there is a perfect patterning and so on, there is a mechanism, doesn't mean it's any more artificial than any other creation. What is natural, what is artificial. And what I actually believe is that the controller faction wants you to believe that they invented this. And this would actually go in line with the whole, I just recently, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Cliff High, Cullen.
No, I don't think
Okay,
I don't
he's
think
like
I
this
am.
old dude, made some predictions with his web bots, pretty interesting, and wide range of information that he's disseminating. And not that this is really my pet peeve topic, but he recently gave some interesting folk tales about, with the current crisis, about what was called Khazaria and the supposed, mafia and people feigning to be Jews and so on. The main point just being the whole idea of name stealing. And then I was like, oh, this is so interesting. I'm briefly recounting this. He said there were folk tales, I didn't verify this, both in Europe and in China. And they basically said if you go too far west or too far east, you'll find these people, they'll feed you, but then they'll drug you, they'll take your story, and then they'll go to your country and make deals in your name. And I'm like, name stealing is a good name, but this kind of sounds like false flag. And the idea of false flag and subsuming positions and brands and so on is a pretty consistent theme, I would say, in the history that we can glean. So I would very much assume that also here the controller faction wants you to believe it's their order, but it's just what the structure is, It's nothing to do with them inventing it at all. That's my impression.
Yeah, I actually very much agree with that. That's sort of the fundamental stance that I hold as well. I think it's inorganic. I come from the stance that I guess this is more of a belief, because obviously none of us can, as much evidence as there is, we can't prove anywhere another whether it is artificial design or whether it's just an organic pattern that arises out of just at least this universe. Maybe there are other multi-dimensional universes that run on a different set of ratios or mathematics, to where it's not the golden ratio. Maybe it's this the Keylontic Christic spiral. That's
That's a good thing. We recently had it on the show. What do you think about that? Where then people again go like, oh, it's all again, it's all satanic. It's all evil. It has to be different. I also don't agree with this.
I personally don't ascribe to any of that lady's stuff. Like, I think it's all nonsense. I think there's a good, it's a good argument for like the Christic crystal itself, as far as like the tree of life, that it's perfectly symmetrical. It's not, it's not a 1.618, it's not a phi ratio, because there are good arguments that, and I've thought about this on, sort of my own, come to that question through my own lines of reasoning. But I think it's pretty arrogant to think that your own system is, and that the system that of nature itself, of all of nature and reality, is a Metatronic, satanic, poison apple of death, as they call the torus field. Essentially the physics of this universe itself is, it's all the demiurge, the design of the demiurge imitating, to siphon our life energy.
Sorry to break in, but I have a perfect follow-up question for you, because there is all kinds of people talking about esotericism also in, let's say, German speaking, and everywhere. Everyone has their own view, and some are more popular, some less. And something I heard recently and was kind of wondering about, and I'd love your take, symbolically or whatever, was the whole, and it's probably not as black and white, but the whole question of, in official story, the Templars got burned at the stake Friday 13, some time ago, because it was claimed they were worshipping Baphomet, right? And then the interesting idea here is that, of course, we understand many, nature gods, Cernunnos and so on, they are horned. They are horned even today in Japan. The wives, they put on horns and so on. There's something there. Moses, in my school, which is, I would say, an old Tartarian building, at the entrance, you go up the stairs, you open a huge door, and then no one even saw it because we had the buffet there, but behind it you had a Moses statue, also horned, in a supposed school, whatever. Point I want to get at is, in terms of energetics, the idea was then that, okay, you have one part of the population that's afraid or despising Baphomet because they are, let's say, Christians, so they are against Satan, let's say, against this symbol. And then you have self-styled Satanists or whatever, blood drinkers or whatever, who may think they are revering that energy, but are actually inverting the life force energy. They are doing stupid stuff like, cutting off, genitals and whatever, all this craziness, right? But then the result energetically would be, you have a large population let's say, trying to fight it, and then a small population worshipping it in the very inverted way. And then the question would be, what does the Baphomet symbol actually stand for? Is it something negative, or is it simply a fertility symbol also related to something called the Bock saga I hadn't heard of before? Some kind of, I don't know, like the Book of Oralinde or something. And Bock in German means something along the lines of Capricorn. So again, horned. And this should then relate back to some kind of founder race saga or whatever. Anyhow, about what anything I said, anything you'd like to mention?
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, the Bach saga again, horned Capricorn itself. Capricorn's ruler is obviously Saturn, and Saturn, Saturn. Essentially, we have the cult of Saturn, the black nobility, essentially the Abrahamic religions are essentially at their core not just astrotheology at large, but heavy sects of them are specifically Saturnian cult. There was offshoots, cult of Venus, offshoots of Hermetic cults, but obviously they're all the part of the bigger zodiacal picture. So of course Eliphas Levi was literally, I think, I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure he's the originator of the archetype of the Baphomet. I mean, at least he did the artwork of the Baphomet that we know to this day. So I don't even think it was around before him. And when was he? What was he? The 1600s, I think. Maybe.
Yeah, I think he was the Middle Ages, kind of Jewish.
I think he was Middle Ages, if I'm not mistaken. But so again, the Baphomet.
Eliphas Levi official timeline was born in 1810.
Okay, it was 1800s. Okay,
that's pretty recent.
A little bit later, but whatever. I don't want to cut you off, but it almost reminds me of the Baphomet symbol of the kind of riddle of the Sphinx, where it's like, here's what human and animal and masculine and feminine, and get it all kind of mashed up together.
It's an amalgamation. Yeah, he wrote about what the Baphomet is and what it symbolizes, and he's not the only one that wrote it. But I'm pretty sure, I think he's the one who originated the Baphomet. I don't think it was around before him. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I'm pretty sure I don't think Baphomet was around before. I think he's the one that created it. But obviously what he describes is obviously the symbolism. What it is the goat is the Capricorn. Capricorn it means goat horn. Capri means goat. Corn means horn. I've covered the etymology and symbolism this deeply in numerous full ebooks and presentations that I've got going on. It's so much, like, it's a thread and a sink that just goes off into so many really interesting etymologies and all that stuff. The corn is the horn. The corn from Proto-Indo-European care, which is the root of keratin. Keratin is a hard substance that makes our fingernails. What the horn is made of is keratin, is the root of a kernel, a kern of L. The kern is like a cairn, is a burial mound in England, the United Kingdom, if not Europe as well. The burial mounds. So it's the corn is the hard kernel. It's a corn on your foot or on your hand. It's a hardened area of skin. It's so a corn care. K-E-R means hard. Horn means hard. Horn is the uppermost part of the head. It's on the crown of the head. The crown is the top uppermost part of the head. It's also the hardest part of our skull, is the crown of the head, where the horns grow out of, where the cornu, C-O-R-N-U, cornu, the root of cornucopia. Again, the cornucopia is the horn of plenty, the heavy symbolism of Greek mythology integrated into Freemasonry for abundance and fortune, good fortune. The fertility, the bounty of the harvest. The harvest season is in Scorpio to Capricorn. the harvest of the season. The harvester of the grain is the god Saturn. Cronus is the god of fertility and agriculture, the fertility of nature, and the agriculture is about the harvest, the bountiful plenty, the abundance of nature at the end of the season, at the death of the season. So, of course, the Capricorn is the death of the season. It is the inversion, where the cross is hung upside down when the sun dies at the winter solstice. All of these things all tie into, so that is the Baphomet. So the goat head with the hermetic, principle of the rebus, in other words, half female, half male, hermaphrodite. In other words, Hermes and Aphrodite, masculine and feminine, united as in the Hieros Gamos, or the sacred marriage, the holy union, the holy matrimony, creating essentially the divine child. Out of that divine union creates the Holy Trinity. So you have the polarities of the physics of the universe creates the divine solar child, and mythology creates, the cycle of nature. That divine child is the resurrection, the savior of humanity, because of course the cycle, the summer comes in and saves our the population from the death of winter, the grips of the Night King, the long. But I'm sort of going off on, but that, it's all the symbolisms there. It's all,
myth. Yeah,
and of course the as above, so below, of course, as well. And
right, I'm kind of curious. We don't have to go long into this. I'm kind of curious, given that we were talking earlier about this transhumanist, Luciferian agenda, how you see this Baphomet symbol, which is potentially linked up with people who think it's the devil or whatever. Wouldn't that be like it's almost like
the question is, was it name stolen as well? Is this symbol, has this been false flagged as well? This is kind of my question,
Yeah, as that goes back to your main point, which was how these people essentially they hide behind a shield of, the same thing with virtue signaling. You put up the virtue signal to, hey, I'm virtuous, this is my signal, but behind it, they're horrible people. They're doing the very things that they're signaling that they're against. Hey, racism is bad. I'm not going to say it because that'll get clipped. Like someone could put it on the internet. Oh, no. Not, but these people are claiming that they're against sexism and racism and all these things, and the truth is they have a history. You dig into their history, they have a long history of doing the exact things that. So of course, that goes back to whatever. Who were you talking to? The Khazarians, I think specifically, but you were bringing up something specific about essentially. The Illuminati themselves, whether they're trying to take credit for being the artificial creators of this matrix, that they it's obvious that they are at least the inheritors of civilization. It's titled the Hivemind Invasion of Civilization because they are, and it goes into detail about who the builders of civilization, specifically what their model is, their hive model, the model of the colony. And in sci-fi, it goes into so many themes. If you go down the technological, the technocratic route, that dark path, the one that's soulless and it's autonomous and it lacks free will choice, and
the whole Prometheus, aliens kind of franchise gets into that in a kind of particular way. Because it's funny, do you think, honestly, okay, how would I put it? And this is all speculation, so you don't have to feel like you're nailed to anything. I'm wondering, have we become aware of something that we're a part of? This is why I was asking about the Baphomet thing, because it seems like a symbol that would be something of what the transhumanists are trying to get us to all become ourselves in some weird way. Where it's like, you're the super sigil. You are more than gay or straight. You are more, it's like all that. I didn't know if you found that ironic in a sense. It's almost like time traveling or something where it's like, look, they threw the symbol's way back there, but that's where we're going now in a sense where it's like this amalgamate person. Like we're beyond, in a weird way, we're getting beyond, geopolitical structures and bloodlines and stuff, like things that have been very traditional, not good or bad necessarily, but things that have governed us in terms of how we operate in the dream, it would seem, are starting, especially with globalization, the internet, psychedelic revolution, everything, the boundaries are dissolving. And with that comes the whole hermaphrodite animal human riddle of the Sphinx, as I called it, right? So it's like, we are animals in a sense. It seems like we're very similar to the material world around us, and yet we're transcendent to that object, like we're the witnesser in the dream. It's a weird trip. You get what I'm trying to get at. I mean, you know more than most what I'm trying to say, but without that which is the now can't be spoken. So or whatever.
Essentially, all things in the universe and in physics. I mean, that's the whole process of it all is integration and assimilation, and of course that's this thing that to bring it all back again, it all sort of gets siphoned by identity politics and all of that, because of course the people who are lost, the lost souls, are obsessed with identity because they have no identity. That's why they're so obsessed with it, because they're not comfortable with the sense of self first. They haven't done the self work, and so instead, as a result, they're obsessed with the very most surface, shallow aspects of humanity. Oh, what's your skin color? Oh, what genitals do you have between your legs? That's all they're obsessed about. That's all that matters to them.
Beautiful differentiations, I should say. Like, these things are valuable in and of themselves. Like the difference between an Asian person and an African person, that's fascinating. A lot of levels.
But then
all you identify with those outer branches of the tree, it's like you're more than the leaves, you're a tree.
So then where's all this outrage coming from about, cultural appropriation? Oh, you're a white woman wearing dreadlocks. I'm in a university and I'm offended, and I'm going to put you in jail, and I'm going to fine you $200,000 for wearing my culture's hairs. Like, these arguments actually happen on university campuses. It's ridiculous. And so
George
it's like
Peterson was at the forefront of that kind of situation in 2017, 2018.
So back to what we're sort of getting at is everything is appropriation. Like, everything is appropriated from somewhere else, from some older culture, from some older civilization. And that's one of the things is in my work, like, especially about language, like, a lot of people get so hung up, and I don't understand why. Like, they get so hung up on, oh, my language is the oldest. Actually, matter of fact, just so don't you know, Macedonian is the oldest, is the real old first language. Oh no, if they're Greek, oh no, Greek is the first oldest language. If they're Indian, oh no, Hindi.
So talking about language, what's your impression of the evolution of culture and civilization linguistically? Obviously, Raphael might have some thoughts on this too. We're told with history, it's like we kind of came from Mesopotamia. Do you look at there being great resets before this? Are we coming from an Atlantis culture and there's kind of like, sine wave rises and falls in consciousness throughout millions and billions of years? Or how do you look at it? Because we've been told, you come from apes, a few of these people got together.
Yeah.
I guess in some weird way, I'm not even against, I'm not for it, like advocating it for it, but it's like I could see to some degree that, I'm not sure what the term would be called for this, but there's, like when someone has an idea on one side of the world, somebody might be inventing the same fucking thing at the same time, and it seems like there's these morphogenetic fields. We had Rupert Sheldrake on, I should have remembered what it's called. Seems like that's playing into this, right? Where it's like, so there, it's not like the Celtic come or Turkish or whatever, Hindi.
Exactly.
In a sense, like these things all kind of bubbled up from the cauldron of being all at once. But what's your and you don't have to give me a nailed down belief, but what's your impression in terms of is there something coming from before all this? Kind of like what Egyptian and Peruvian cultures look similar enough, and it's like that gets into whole post
and not only that, but all of the ancient civilizations all share the same root, architectural styles, the same themes. Like, despite being in different continents across the world that supposedly had no, connection to each other, but yet the evidence is there that they all had to have had heavy influence on each other. Otherwise, it was pure morphic resonance, that they all spring up, do the exact same things, the exact same way. They all build pyramids in the exact same style. Those pyramids are direct representations of the human physiology, exactly the same way. They all are a staircase rising up to heaven with an atrium or a hollow at the very apex of it. In other words, representing the spinal column and the third ventricle of the brain, where the third ventricle contains the cerebrospine, is where the cerebrospinal fluid is produced in the mandorla-shaped, almond-shaped Vagina, essentially, it's literally the vagina of the brain, because of course, again, as above, so below the belt, we have sexual organs that are the exact same. This was literally my original work, that, there wasn't anything out there before this. It just stumbled upon it, that there's literally images of the brain that look exactly like it. Is the exact same sacred geometry as the urogenital triangle of the female. It's literally a vagina in the brain. So it's the symbolism. The brain itself is literally the sexual symbolism of the physics, sex, magic, physics of nature. You have the overarching cerebrum, the neocortex, with the reptilian masculine basal ganglia that penetrates it at the center and at the very junction of that. And
cranium,
the Shiva lingam, exactly, or Jeb, the earth god with the phallic, giant pillar that impregnates Nut, the goddess of the sky, overarching. So again, the sex magic of nature itself, the physics of the mythology encompasses this from all cultures the world over. All have the same theme.
Crowley and people like that just get off on tangents and focus on one thing improperly, or it seems like this is the song that never ends, the never-ending story, and it's just kind of regurgitating like a Rubik's Cube, inverting on itself forevermore.
Yeah, the recapitulating. Yeah. To get back to the point in the question of languages and all that, it is cyclical. That's what we know conclusively, is everything in the universe is cyclical, and it's fractal, holographic and fractal. People throw around the word holographic universe a lot, and they think that they're referring to an artificial, AI created matrix. That's not what holographic means. Holographic comes from Greek holos, which means whole, and a graph means letter or symbol. So hologram, gram is grammar, grimoire literally means it's a letter. In other words, a written word, a language. So hologram means that the information of the whole thing is contained in every single piece of the whole. So in other words, the pixel has the whole picture of the whole screen on it. So you have a pixel has the whole picture, and then it's fractal, so it expands larger.
So ironically, it seems that simulation theory is also explained potentially through these mechanisms, if you want to put it that way. It's like you're saying they're not. People get them conflated, but it's not terribly surprising as to why, because it's like it's what's going on on my stream or whatever.
Yeah, it's like, well, what designed that perfect mathematical fractal, the fractal geometry of the universe? Well, it's got to be an algorithm. It's got to be a phi ratio. It tends to be the Fibonacci sequence phi ratio tends to be the underlying root geometry that creates the physics of the structure of the matrix and all that. But so what begat
information? It's
why
really,
is it that?
Yeah, exactly. It's a gnarly.
Why isn't it something else? But that's what like the Go ahead.
Ralph, did you want to say something? I just saw you pop up, so I was like, "What up?"
I'm listening. I have more questions, but go on.
Okay.
I never feel like you rammed. Oh, and this is why we fucking get you on here, bro. This is gold. And I thought of something while you were talking about this. If you ever get shit from people being like, "Oh, this is an original," be like, "I'm a fucking esoteric curator. I'm creating the Louvre of thought here. Fuck all."
Well, what I was gonna say is like that argument is so weak and literally invalid, but yet not everyone, but just a few vocal haters continually use that same argument as if like it's legitimate, but of course it's not, because it's like, oh, an artist who does original work, their own original paintings or creation out of it, something, their own inspiration, their work isn't original because the colors that they're using are derivative. And this is, for anyone who's actually and I'm not an academic, I'm not a scholar, I'm sort of an anti-academic, anti-scholar. Like I don't even respect those institutions, but I'm not so arrogant and crude as like all the flat earthers are to totally just discredit like the principles of academia and such as writing a bibliography or citing your sources and actually trying to reference and give credit to the works that you draw from and that you derive from, which is that's a big problem out there. And honestly, I didn't know a lot about that because I a lot of all my own writings and stuff, and I only had like a high school, level education, but I was really good at writing and creative writing and narrative writing, and very good at skilled in English and all that. But the reasons why I wrote my own stuff, I made up my own works. Like I didn't do a lot of like research stuff, but I came across this, learning how to do proper, citing my work, citing my sources, and doing a bibliography. And I now understand the importance of it. A lot of people actually criticize that, like, saying that, everything is plagiarizing from everyone else because it's all from the same universal source. And it's like, yes, but an artist creates an original work using the paints. There's only so many colors that you can use in your palette, but it's the way you put them. It's the way you put those pieces together. It's your own creative interpretation. That's called, in academia and in writing, that's called a derivative work. It's a legitimate work. You can take someone else's work that's already pre-existing, as long as you are adding your own. It's in content creation.
The Beach Boys heard fucking the Beatles, and they were like, "We want to do something like that."
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many sounds.
I was just looking at your chart. Your Chiron, which is your wound, is in first house with your sun. You're a Cancer, but like you're always going to have. And you just have to get over this yourself, however long you want to take. You got a whole lifetime, or you can do it like tonight. You can't worry about having to. You're going to feel like you need to prove yourself, but you're always going to feel like people don't believe that you're proving yourself properly. That's your karma. Let's put it that way. That's your wounds. You're always going to be like, hey, so just kind of accept it and be like, look, there's for every 100 people that ever see anything, like 20 people are going to not pay attention to get it. Like 10 people are going to be like, fuck you, I wish I did that, and say, you know what I mean? It's like, that's a very insightful point, because honestly, I don't pay enough attention to astrology as I should, especially my own. I've just got cursory, like the pieces of it. It surprises me. You're like, look, I can break down the matrix, and you're like, but astrology, it's like, bro, that's the language.
Well, it's been it's been years since I was like really heavy, into like, being involved in astrology, and it's been years, so I'm like not as. You kind of go down these rabbit holes, and you got to kind of circle back to it in order to refresh, all of that. But yeah, you're right about that, and that is why I continually my work gets better. It just gets better because I am my own biggest critic, and I do take criticism to heart, and I do have that drive to want to prove. Not just I don't have to prove anything to myself. Like I know that worth, and I know that it's there, but I do feel the need. I have to prove it to everyone else, and everyone else is like, you don't have, never try to prove yourself to anyone else. It's a, endless battle. It's a, fruitless battle. But I feel the exact opposite. Like it's in that striving to prove the things to other people. That's where this work emerges from. Is in trying to show that there is evidence, to show the evidence to prove your case, because that comes from like my whole family are attorneys. Like my dad's an attorney, my uncle's an attorney, my grandpa is an attorney. So in other words, you have to.
You're basically an attorney of certain perspectives.
I sort of hate that sort of. I've come to like it a little bit, understand the importance of it more now. But it's what the principle is you prove your case. I mean, you present your facts, you show your case. The case, tells the story. The facts are the building blocks that tell the story that paint the actual picture of what reality is. We have to use those facts. The facts and the evidence is what will lead us to the truth. Because the facts are those apples that are falling from the tree of truth. And this is deep symbolic etymology right there, the tree and the truth, because truth literally comes from the etymology of tree. The tree literally means the truth. The root of the tree is the root is the root of truth. This goes back to the very root word of truth. I've got several videos and articles and stuff on this. The tree is the solid foundation. It stands on a solid foundation. You have to have deep roots to have a solid, and you have to build your foundation on solid rock. Otherwise the shifting sands of time, cause that structure to crumble. And this is what the builders of civilization understand very well. And the tree also has to be flexible. And it's like a golden ratio between, rigidity and flexibility. It has to bend before it breaks. Otherwise it'll snap. So it's got to be like either a little bit more flexible than rigid, or a little bit more rigid than flexible. It's one or the other. Either one works.
I'm curious.
Same with our mentality.
When people say squaring the circle and circling the square, is that like a representation of like so? For example, squaring the circle, would that be like putting masculinity on top of femininity, and the verse is the other way? And it seems like that's the cycles of the Torah, and they kind of just go through sine waves, and that's just what everything is in some weird way.
Yeah, it essentially, at the basic fundamentals, it represents masculine and feminine. It doesn't necessarily represent masculine dominating femininity or anything like that. It's just the two principles of nature, masculine and feminine. You have the circle and the square. You have a curve and a phallic straight line, a phallic pillar. Those are the two building blocks. And Walter Russell's work is very in-depth and very detailed as to just exactly how and why that works. And I included a lot of Walter Russell's, drawings and his fundamental principles of the physical structure of light and space and time in the book, because it is so fundamental. And he was, and he was absolutely 100% correct on that. So at the time when he wrote and came up with all of this, it was literally just pulling it out of the ether, out of the the collective unconscious, but he was absolutely correct. And my book has so many more examples as to exactly how we can find it, where we find that in nature, and not just in nature, but what I like to tie it into is how it's being shown in pop culture and reiterated through mythology and science fiction and all of these other esoteric, things that are sort of saturated in pop culture, at least the good stuff. But yeah, so the cube, he wrote that the cube and the sphere are the building blocks of the single working tools that the universe uses to create. And it's very simple. So obviously we don't see cubes really very often in nature, but we do see cubes. They're in crystalline structure. In other words, a salt crystal is perfect cube. A bismuth crystal, and I show visual examples of that in the book of exactly how it's shown. For example, we'll see symbolic examples of that in Christopher Nolan's Interstellar film, which was great, one of the really good ones. And so at the end of the film, he goes through the vortex at the center of the black hole, and that leads him into a sort of a singularity.
Yeah.
And there, in the singularity, he enters into a tesseract, and he sees all these little strings, essentially, which sort of symbolically represents string theory. But more geometrically, symbolically, it's literally, they'll show this one scene where he's going up, and it's a perfect cubic, or in other words, a hexagonal, essentially, vortex that he's going through. And there's all the strings and the tessellated, reflections of all the different realities that he's, seeing simultaneously. And he can sort of pluck each little string of the timeline and sort of, affect that reality by plucking the strings, plucking the strings on a harp, playing music or whatever. But, so it's a direct representation of how the bismuth crystal is. It's got it's like a little pyramidal, but it's got perfect 90 degree angles to the crystal, but it kind of spirals around. So it's like a square pyramid, essentially. It's like a square spiral. They're really incredible looking crystals. But so we do find cubes in nature, not very often, and it's only in crystal structure. So it's literally only in the geometry itself. But again, that we find hexagonal geometry all over in nature. Obviously, not just in bees' honeycombs, but in I include examples of what certain physics professors have actually supposedly figured out what creates that hexagonal geometry in nature. For example, what creates the hexagonal scales on a crocodile's snout, or what creates the hexagonal scales on a dry lake bed, where the mud cracks and it creates these hexagonal scales, or hexagonal basalt, which is pretty well
The
known to
giant
flat
causeway
earthers
or
and
all that shit.
the giant trees that the hexagonal basalt is giant mountains they're giant trees that became mountains. No, I'm poking fun because there's actually physics. There's a rational, reasonable explanation behind that, and I know that the cellular biological structure seems like a good argument, but it doesn't really hold water when we really scrutinize it. But
so I'm curious what I was saying earlier, because you don't have to agree or disagree, but what I was kind of wondering, and you were saying it doesn't mean this, but I see it being possibly able to be superimposed. There's a meme that kind of says this in another dimensional way, where it's like, hard times make strong people make great times turn into soft people create issues create strong people. It's like the perennial kind of story. That's kind of what I was saying with the squaring and the circle thing, because it seems like when you have a Spartan rigid structure, it's like the circle kind of nudges off the sharp edges, and you kind of get, it's like, hey, let's not all just like put our kids in the fucking countryside for the wolves to eat. Let's like raise, let's be a little more feminine. And then when we're at a period like now with social justice warriors and stuff, it's like we're way too circular potentially, or we've gone too far on the nubbing of the edges, depending on one's presuppositions. And hold on, there's ants all over my computer, I just realized.
They're attracted to the electricity. Yeah, dude, that's one of the things. When I was in Bali, the ants will get into the Wi-Fi routers, and they'll fuck it up. They'll get into your computers, and they'll eat it all up. They're attracted to EMF fields. So you gotta find ways to keep them out.
I probably should have done this outside, I'm realizing now. Derp. It's the best Wi-Fi signal I got. So anyway, if you have any thoughts on what I'm saying, I don't think it's like a truth, but it seems like this kind of ebbing and flowing. It's almost like an amorphous figure, and it's like it squares out sometimes, it circles out sometimes. That's what I kind of
So the cube is like the invisible scaffold. When we build architecture, we build sort of cubic scaffolding, and then we fill it out with the architecture that fills that scaffolding in, and then eventually once the structure is built, we take the scaffolding down, because it doesn't need to be there. It's only there for the building of the structure, and then it can be disassembled. That's what the cube is. The cube is the rigid, it's the invisible space itself, and then the sphere is sort of chiseled out of that cube. Like you have a cube, and then you sculpt a sphere out of a cube. Like you can't have a sphere and then
relocate inside, because this is starting to become an issue. And I'm like, oh, well, they destroy my computer. Keep talking.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. But so you can't make a sphere into a cube, but you can make a cube into a sphere. So that's sort of how it works. Is the cube is the predecessor, essentially. It's the prime structure, and that's why it's considered masculine, because masculine is essentially, it's the first impulse, and the feminine circle, the womb, is infinite. It's that thing that is it's the void. It is the thing that's just empty space that all things occupy. These are the two principles of physical creation. And you can see it in the honeycomb. Like I show the images in the book. Like you can see that actual structure in the honeycomb itself. You can see the cubic, in other words, the cubicles. This is where we get, and I include that in the book, as well as the symbolism of the cubicle. The cubicle is essentially the symbol of the hive mind. It's because we're boxed into the cubic forms of space. Not just because it's a division of space and time. Obviously, to create things in the universe, you have to divide. The very first impulse is division, and division isn't essentially a bad thing. It's all things created have to come through a division. And Nassim Haramein, I think he has some pretty prolific works as to how the hexagram, or the hexagonal geometry, is essentially the structure of space and time being divided, because you can infinitely divide a hexagram, like smaller and smaller and smaller, infinitely by itself. And I'm not too great with math or geometry, other than the symbolic aspects of it, so I don't know exactly how that works, but yeah, the hexagram is exactly how things are in infinite fractal division, and it's that division that creates multiplicity, and in multiplicity you have interactions between multiple versions of of the whole, and so that's the whole purpose. Like otherwise that's essentially God wanted to create life in order to know itself, in order to know himself, essentially. Let's just say himself for argument's sake. In order to know himself, it's like you're sitting there as an infinite consciousness. It's you want something more. You want a process of creation. You want something to unfold so that you have within that process, like there are many experiences, infinite realities, infinite interactions being made, lives being lived, experiences being had, and through all those experiences you have a compendium of of wisdom that comes out of it, life lessons learned. It's how the universe comes to know itself, the same way like if all the cells in our body they're always communicating. We don't essentially know what that language is. Well, scientists now have discovered the language of cellular communication. It's a slight little resonant frequency. It's like a little, they just use a little frequency to communicate, and it's a resonant frequency. That's how the cells, interact. But they communicate through chemistry. They send out chemical signals. Those chemical signals attach to other receptors, and it says, hey, this process needs to happen. And so the chemistry has a molecular structure. That molecular structure is the sacred geometry of the universe. The geometry is the music. It's the resonant frequency. It's the language of the universe. It's how the universe comes to know itself, is through the geometry. It's the language of mathematics that is the universal language. So it's how all beings and all life in the universe comes to know itself, and through knowing ourselves, that information gets fed back to the source. And in other words, so God becomes more conscious of itself through each of our experiences. And the more we learn about ourselves and the universe that we inhabit, the more God comes to know itself. So that's, again, I think we talked about that before, is sort of the opposite of what most people perspective is, that what if so God's all knowing and knows everything, as infinite consciousness. So then but I come to everything sort of points me to in the direction that it's unconscious, and it's becoming conscious the more we learn, and the more conscious we become, the more the superior being that we inhabit, or God, that the superorganism that we're a part of, becomes conscious. The more we become conscious.
I hear you.
So
I think Carl Jung was talking about it, where it's like, there's a sphere essentially of what we are aware of, the conscious mind or whatever, and then anything outside of that sphere is unconscious, and what you're kind of saying is just a feedback loop that just keeps expanding, potentially, and it's like it just becomes a little more knowledgeable itself and includes more, but the horizon, event horizon, whatever the horizon line of that barrier between known and unknown just increases, basically.
Expanding bubble. Exactly. Yeah, or sphere. We call it a sphere of awareness. Essentially, it is the more things that we become aware of, the larger, the broader our perspective becomes. In other words, the more concepts that we have, until eventually, the universal mind, it includes all, it includes all perspectives.
And do you think that's going to be some kind of apotheosis where we're all just turned on to a good hive mind, in a sense, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm an individual, but I'm remembering I'm a part of a dream, and we want to go bigger and better, and that's kind of a fourth wall breaking new story.
Exactly. That's the core, the core principle and the core dilemma. The moral question is, we can't sacrifice our individual. That's the core moral question that needs to be emphasized. We can't sacrifice individuality, because this is the duality between subjective perception and a greater objective reality that we exist within. Obviously 2 + 2 = 4, always. The math is objective. It's something that doesn't change. Even if it does change,
whether
it's a formula.
Was an observer or not, that would be a case.
Yeah, that's subjective perception, but subjective perception only exists within an objective reality. Otherwise, you wouldn't have subjective perception. It's like to subjectively perceive an object, there has to be an object there for you to perceive it from different angles, to see different, oh, it's a different shape from this angle, oh, it's a different shape from yeah, but there's an object there. That's what the objective truth is. The truth is there's an object. Like, it's not how we see the object, but so we can't sacrifice individuality to assimilate with the Borg, with the hive mind, and this is the theme of the Hivemind Invasion in the book. Is all of these themes relate to sacrificing individuality to become a drone. In other words, the hive mind is you're plugged into a larger collective, and this is what they're trying to usher us into, is a collectivism that sacrifices individuality for the greater good. Obviously, this became most prominent during COVID, and maybe that's why they released the WandaVision with all the hive mind symbolism directly at that time. Maybe
how do you
that's
see
just
the cause and necessity of submission of individuality? Because it seems, how would I put it? If one takes individualism too far, you get fucked up in a very particular way. I'm just thinking of early.
You get selfishness.
Right. Or even it's like, hey, I'm not a hunter, but you are. I'll cook the food. You do that. Like we have our skill sets, but we're gonna throw in for the greater good of our subsistence or survival or whatever. It seems like there's a middle point where it's like everyone is individually tailored, but it's like a musical note is like cool by itself, I guess, but when you have it in a symphony, it makes a whole lot more impact, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Maybe we had spoken about this, but are you familiar with spiral dynamics? Ken Wilber, like transcendental psychology, I think they call it, transpersonal psychology. It's basically like a ladder system of consciousness, starting with like mythic survival-based consciousness, almost like the chakras, going up through competition, nation states, ideas, until eventually arriving at the green sphere, which is very much even the Green Party, like sacrificing yourself for the greater good, where still the fear remains of excluding anyone. And only then on the next level, it's called the second tier, which would be the first fearless state, which is an integration of individuality with an understanding of holistic interconnectedness to everything, because there certainly can also be a very positive manifestation of the hive mind, and anyone who's experienced synchronicity or telepathy, I mean, we all are obviously connected. To me, it's not a question anymore. The point is just, how do we approach this? And again, do we allow this to be supplanted by some artificial system or allow it to be steered? Or can we activate our very inherent, I would say, abilities, which can truly benefit everyone, and we can act like a hive, but without losing any of the individuality,
Yeah, exactly. That's it's ultimately, that's the core principle of basically all of our timeless stories of good and evil. I mean, it's very prominent in
Lucifer, Melkor, exactly.
Lucifer, who went against the rule of God, essentially the independent radical who wanted to experience things for himself, exactly mirrored in Tolkien's mythology, or his essentially essentially derived, it's a derivative work from basically Gnostic Christianity. His supreme Lucifer was Melkor, and so this is very perfectly summarized in the Silmarillion, where the most supreme, the original creator god, Eru Iluvatar, so that's a very symbolic name itself. Eru, resonant of Heru or Horus, and Iluvatar, sort of a combination of the Ilu, which was, I believe, Akkadian or Babylonian word for God or gods, the Ilu, and it's sort of an amalgamation of Ilu and Avatar from Hindu. So you have, this is sort of a Mesopotamian meshing with Hindu theology there. So Eru Iluvatar, the most supreme hive being, created the music of the Ainur. In other words, the Ainur are the gods, and so they had the music of the harmony, the music of the spheres, essentially at the genesis of the creation of the universe. And Melkor was the most divine of the Ainur, and he wanted to sing his own song. He wanted to to go against the resonance of the harmony of the original music of Eru Iluvatar, and he wanted to create, he wanted to become a creator himself. He wanted to test his own creative skill, to sing his own song. And but the problem is it became discord. It became chaotic, because you have two competing.
He was singing tritones. I'm kidding.
I mean, it creates a cacophony as opposed to a symphony. And a cacophony is you have multiple competing or clashing energies. So everything goes back to energetics, and everything goes back to the basic physics of the universe. That's what we have to essentially abide by, is the universal laws.
Are we just anthropomorphizing that whole process? So like with the Silmarillion example, it would be like cymatics existed and there was a perfect cymatic, and then there was discordant frequency alteration, and that creates a cycle in the golden age to the fucking bronze, Kali Yugas or whatever. Is that what we're going?
That's essentially what the Keylontic, lady, I forget her name, but she makes up all these words all the time. That's the biggest problem I have with it. She's like the yell.
Look, yeah, no, I was like
the yell and the ya. It's like you make up
a third line.
Nobody understands what the hell you're talking about unless they're like religion, treat it like a religion, and they're like, oh well, she says this, so it's got to be true. I'm like, you're just making up words. None of that means anything.
It's like an RPG in a sense, where it's like she's just gone Dungeons and Dragons really hardcore with a certain algorithm.
But the point that's a good argument is that supposedly the original geometric structure of the universe was this Christic spiral that's not phi ratio, and so the problem with phi ratio is that it's always infinitely getting closer and closer and closer to the source, but never unifying with, or never originating from, never unifying back to the source. It's just constantly on a spiral that's going around that's going around the central fulcrum.
But isn't it like, as long as we want individuality, that's kind of where you have to remain anyhow, so what's the big deal?
Yeah,
you want to annihilate yourself, go straight to source.
Exactly. So then you don't have the universal experience. Well, then they're like, oh well, it's just detached from source. You're disconnected from source. And
how is that even possible?
Yeah. We're not disconnected from source. Otherwise, nothing would exist. I mean, you can't create without something to create from. It's you have no creation without a connection to a source of creation. So it's like we're never disconnected from source. Otherwise we wouldn't have anything beautiful, that all these messages and universal teachings and knowledge and wisdom and art and beauty and the beauty of nature and the beauty of life and sexuality and the beauty of the orgasm and all of these things that we can experience in what is a garden of a beautiful garden of life, and what is the pleasures of of the flesh, and what it is meant to be, a pleasurable experience of life and learning and evolution here. As long as the basic core principles are followed, the principles of natural law, and having basic human needs met. But I mean, there's nothing. But so the physics of the universe, things always come into resonance. So this is the experiment where you have a shit ton of metronomes or a shit ton of clocks in a room, and they're all tuned to different things, and they're all going off on crazy. But as time progresses, they all start to synchronize. They all start to eventually they come into perfect synchrony, and every single one of them. There's that last one that's really defiant, and it's the only one going against the thing. But eventually, it comes into balance as well. That's how the universe works. Everything does come into resonance, and it is cymatics. Like there's a cymatic pattern. There's a form, a geometry that's created, and then there's a change of the frequency, and during that change of the frequency, everything gets blown into total discord, and everything's going crazy, and there's a period of chaos. And then there's another higher level of order that things come into. They resonate into a higher level of order. They crystallize into a higher level of order. Just layers of an onion. You
can kind of see it actually in the Tesseract scene, in when it's collapsing, when he's kind of done his job or whatever. It's like it's like very kind of a kaleidoscopic collapse.
Yeah.
It's funny because what I was saying earlier with the anthropomorphizing of these kind of principles, it's like, all right, say it like musically speaking or whatever, you can use shapes, whatever. It's like C is home base, we're in the key of C, but there's elements that want to be in D, and to get from C to D, there's going to be a whole lot of confusion getting there. But once you're in D, that's the new home. So that religion's like, we're there in the golden age, whereas the C people, like, we're in the downtrodden times, we got to get back to C. And it's just constant like regurgitation of of dynamic, basically.
Yeah, or the different religions themselves, having their own things, but essentially each one of them has the same derivative core message or theme in there, especially a symbolic one. I mean, if you're too literal about your religion, you're not going to see the symbolic, the symbolic allegories or the similarities between them all. There's the same symbolic.
I have a simple maybe follow-up question, which I may have asked before, but it's such a recurring theme, I guess, in religion and even on state symbolism, and that is the symbol of, it's on the Georgian flag, I believe, or basically it's St. George slaying the dragon. I'm sure you're familiar with that image, right? I believe it's also on the Russian flag, in the middle, actually, interestingly enough. And this is one of the images where I'm like, I'm not exactly sure yet who is slaying whom, if I should be happy about it, or what is exactly described. Because on the one hand, it would be like, oh, it's the, the new order destroying the old order, or it's, overcoming the reptilian lower aspect of the brain or humanity or whatever.
Saturn taking out Uranus, but it's like, is he really supposed to do that?
Just like with Apollos and Dionysus and so on, if you try to deny one aspect, you only gotta get into even more trouble. But do I want to kill my reptilian brain? Then I'm gonna stop breathing, So what is this in your mind, and why is the imagery put on everywhere? What's your view on that?
Oh yeah, well that's the whole theme of not of all the esoteric works, but I include a lot of that in fact, that's the chapter that I go into sort of like once. I didn't really try to structure the book too. I just followed the flow of how the sync went, but if the flow of the sync it did was able to structurize it into actual chapters. Like originally it had, most of my work has no chapters, like it's too hard to segment it into chapters and all that, but this is sort of gets into the theme of breaking out of the box.
Body. It's like, where do you start? I mean, the head, the foot.
Yeah, exactly. It's all connected. Yeah. So what's the separation? There's no separation between the head to the foot, but there sort of is. I mean, you have joints and stuff there, but so it's sort of, I get into breaking out of the box, and then that chapter would be the Throne of God. I'm not sure, it's not really numbered, but page 168 is where it starts, and that's sort of, I don't go too deep into it in this book.
Is it 1.6C or whatever? Isn't that part of the Fibonacci?
Gonna get into it very in depth in some of the future films or videos, or whenever I get into that. But honestly, I haven't had much time to actually.
No, you're cool. I was just saying the page number you're saying.
Continue with my work, but it's essentially it's the theme that, and I haven't revealed this in any of my works videos yet, but I need to, because it's a whole theme of my future videos. Is the Throne of God essentially is. I mean, it's conquering. I can't get the right page to get on the camera. It's
cool.
the theme of
those things. This is the Ark of the Covenant, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's the basic theme of course we don't slay. The purpose is not to slay or conquer, to kill your dragon, and the purpose is to tame it. And it's your most basic self. It's your fundamental. It's your power. The dragon is the power, when the dragon mother, she's the most powerful, being that there is. Because if you got dragons on your side, nobody can conquer you. You're unbeatable. So of course your dragon. Game of
Thrones again, yeah. But it's correct enough, yeah.
I mean that's what's the whole theme of Game of Thrones is. That's why he slays the terrible dragon mother, because it's Marduk slaying Tiamat. Literally the same symbolism. That's why he slayed her with a trident. The knife it's a trident, or what I call a sident. Sort of a play on words. The sai is the three pointed dagger. It's a trident. A sident. The sai, literally Greek psi, the letter psi, literally means a form of psychic energy. Yeah. Psi literally means a form of psychic energy. That's why PSY, as in psychology, is no different from PSI, the Greek letter psi. And that's literally I've got so much symbolism on all of this. I mean, that's what the trident is. That's the whole theme of why Aquaman carries the trident. This in the very same image. I don't even have to turn the page. It's in the same graphic. That's why he's holding the Sident directly in front of his face, because it's the Sushumna Ida Pingala with the little, it's got a little diamond at the base of it, which is the sacrum of the spine. And that's why, what does he do when he gets the Sident of King Atlan and he becomes the king? He conquers the dragon, and he rides the chaos monster, dragon sea monster of the deep abyss, which is Tiamat. And he rides it. Where does he ride it? Directly between the eyes. Directly between her eyes. Exactly like, where's the throne on the Game of Thrones promo poster? It's a dragon. Okay, I gotta get it closer so you can see. It's a damn dragon. And that's why they're showing you the dragon throne, the iron throne. They made it into the dragon's head. Because you sit between the eyes on the dragon. Exactly where Aquaman sits in the movie, with carrying the Sident, because the Sident is what? He gets psychic power over all the creatures in the ocean. It's the telepathy. So it's the psychic power.
It's not so much about, like you're saying, defeating the dragon. It seems. Do you find that to be kind of a representation, I guess, obviously, of Kundalini power, all this kind of stuff, but the animalistic part of ourselves, and that we have this kind of image of God, higher mind self, that can kind of tame it or whatever? Not
even animalistic side, but just literally basic biological aspect. It's just under a balance of the basic biology, because as we know, most people, and this is heavily gone into detail in some of my other works about, is the basics of lack of balancing our own physiology and our own biology leads to disease and death and all of that stuff. But it also leads to emotional mind control, mass formation psychosis, COVID hysteria, pandemic hysteria, people terrified of getting sick from these diseases because they literally don't know the very basics of biology, the very basics of health and lifestyle. I mean, they think wearing or doing some sort of practice is going to make them healthy. It's like all the marketing for, I'm a child, and I wear the mask to keep my family healthy. A mask is not going to keep you healthy. It might, they're making like, all these claims.
Dead, I'm going to do this now in his memory.
But that's getting off into like other tangents, but it's a basic understanding of biology. I mean, I show this, I'm going to show symbols, and I was going to try to finish that video today, but I had some other editing to do on my website while I've got my day off, and then got the podcast to do, but I was going to try to get that video done, literally about, how to tame your dragon and riding your dragon and all of that. There's very deep symbolism, how it's not just, Kundalini symbolism. I've got literal new discoveries that's, there's a water dragon, and say the third ventricle is, I don't want to give it away too soon, but the third ventricle is third ventricle is literally like, I have graphic animation. It's like you show the anime. It's literally it's a dragon, like the third ventricle connected to the fourth ventricle down the central spinal column. It's a water dragon. It's a water serpent. Again, the water serpent of the abyss, Tiamat. The female goddess serpent monster of the deep is the very basic archetype of all these themes. And so the themes, the mythology did have where the king slays the serpent monster of the abyss, but it's actually, that's a sexual innuendo. He lays her, he slays her, with his phallic sword.
Again, of course. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So he lays her, he beds her. It's not the mad patriarchy killed off the feminine goddess, and they took over society and civilization. It's always been revolved around the goddess. It always is. The Illuminati has always revered. I mean, Wicca, witchcraft, it's always a real. I mean, sure, you can make an argument for these are patriarchal religions and stuff, but I mean, not at their core, not at their fundamental basis. I mean, it's all Hieros, it's all sex magic. It's all.
Well, it seems some of the distortions happen when people pay attention to one aspect over others. Yeah. I mean, it's like kind of that pentagram you're showing. It's like if you really focus on your right hand and make your whole religion about the right hand, it's like you're going to be necessarily other aspects.
One hand, cuts off the other. It's both hands have to work. You use both hands.
So what do you think the answer to all this is? Because in a culture war, we can get into this stuff if you want, culture wars and veganism and diet and masks or whatever. It seems like I said earlier, like we have very it's like how far back do you want to go? And Raphael might even dispute the historicity of some of these events, like World War II's causes or whatever. But it seems like, let's just say at the turn of the 20th century, we were being galvanized and possibly reset in a very particular way. Even Eisenhower's like, watch out for the military-industrial complex. Like, I mean, that's a very masculine kind of energy. And because that dominated the Cold War and all these kind of things happened over, Vietnam, all this kind of shit happened for a long time. And I'm not even saying I agree with it or don't or whatever. I'm just saying it seems like, bloodshed, war, dominance, kind of Freudian, like, sex is everything. These kinds of thoughts took over, and what we see now is an attempt, albeit maybe too far in the pendulum swing, of a rectification of that. But it seems like we're losing. I mean, that's why I do appreciate listening to Jordan Peterson. He's got a really good lecture on line somewhere. I watched it. Was like many hours, 13 hours, about Pinocchio and all sorts of crazy shit. And I was just like, this is gnarly, very Jungian, very cool. But it seems like we've got to come to this middle point, and it's not so much that like being an asexual, like multicolored Baphomet thing of the New World Order is the answer, but it does seem like we're kind of getting out of maybe hard patriarchal, hard puritanical, hard guns keep us safe and we got to kill. You see what I'm saying? It's like we might be evolving out of that. So how do you see? There's no right answer. I'm just kind of curious. Like, how do you see the balancing of the Tao given our climate? I guess.
Yeah. Shit, man, I don't know. To be quite honest,
the answer is like it takes all kinds, but it seems like there's certain poles that are trying really hard to like vampirism or whatever. And that's almost the agent smithing in the Matrix, where it's like you could get taken over by hostile energies that don't have your best interest at heart, and that's when you aren't really riding your dragon or taming it, and somebody else is giving you a dragon or whatever.
Yeah, it all comes back to the same fundamental principles, the same core principles, the main fundamental Hermetic principles that have always been the most important, for the leaders and creators and builders of civilization. In other words, the ancient mystery schools, which I mean was Freemasonry. The fundamental Hermetic principles, the basics, is of course the trivium and quadrivium, but the main core tenet is to know thyself. First is to know thyself, and you will know the secrets of the universe, because the secrets of the universe are inherent in ourself, because we are a direct product of the universe itself. We are essentially, this is the exact core meaning of we're made in the image of God, and that doesn't mean that God is a human. It doesn't mean God looks like a man. It means that it means that all the physics and the symbolism of the physics and structure and geometry and holographic fractal, the fractality of the universe is the same structures as I've shown, probably, damn near more than anyone else out there in all the work, like in the biology and the anatomy and so many ways about it that is easily observable. And so through those fundamental principles, it just makes it clear and abundantly clear, but people can get lost in the esoterica and, the mythology and all that stuff and not understand the core principle of it. It's very as simple as it gets. It all goes back to health, nutrition, fitness, the basic fundamentals of how to be a healthy human being, and that means how to raise, how to reproduce a healthy human being and how to reproduce healthy humans. It's eugenics. It's the true meaning of eugenics, good genetics. And I've got that full 2.5 hour presentation going deep into, how to optimize human potential, through diet, lifestyle, exercise, nutrition, but also the nuances, the interesting details about the symbolism and the mythology and the anatomy and, the biology and the physics of the human structure and all that cool stuff that it makes it really interesting to learn about. But that is the basics of knowing thyself. And that's the basics of, taming your dragon and, making it your the dragon represents the creative power, the creative force. Kundalini energy, the serpentine energy, is the sexual energy. It's the sexual life force. It's the vitality. It's the fire. It's the fire breathing. The fire breathing is the breath of fire, is the creative impulse of life. It's the driving factor.
I'm going to guess you've read or heard, at least I heard the audiobook, Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of the Ages. It's like the fire of the Poimander thing, where it's like, it's an inanimate, weird thing, and it's just like it is a structure, and it's got, whatever, yay. And then once that dragon or whatever it is, the salamander comes in, it's like, now it's animated. Now there's spirit. Now it's going. Now there's a reason for it. Which kind of ties back a little to the 2001 Space Odyssey thing, because you were saying people are confused. I think it's a little like the last scene, last 20 minutes or whatever, where it's like, holy shit, we're watching ourselves through various periods of time. Like I'm the observer, I'm in the thing, and then it just turns into this kind of psychedelic trip, where words and shapes, it's color, it's frequency. I mean, that's all it is. Like you start seeing the bandwidths of cymatics through basically visual representation, and that if we can get to a place where we can hold on to that, but still like love our neighbors and not be assholes. It sounds like, because I want to get, we don't have to talk about it now if you want to go and edit stuff or start winding down. I know it's late for Raphael. Maybe we should have you and maybe Alexander Bazone, he's a cool guy, come on and talk about, or just you, whatever, talk about like what you were saying, because I haven't seen that long video you were talking about where it's like, I'm vegan just because I ate acid and decided, after a long time vegetarian, I was like, oh, I can't do this anymore. But that's not a logical reason as to like, oh, I'm getting the salts in my body that I need for this, and it's not like what you might be talking about. If you want to talk about it now, we can. If you want to address it in another episode, we'll get you on again. It's probably a good reason to get you back on, honestly. So
we could do it in another episode. That would probably be best.
Word.
I think.
All right. Well, so in kind of wrapping up, Raphael, do you have any questions? And if there's anything we haven't touched upon about your book, like where people can get it, what's the cost, all this kind of stuff, lay it on us.
Okay, you can get it from my website. I basically finished the website when I finished the book, sort of to market or to make it easy to get. It's my new site is liftingtheveil.tv. I mean, it's very basic, very simple. So that's sort of my hub now, where I've got my main YouTube channel is now my backup YouTube channel is now my main channel, because I never got my main one back. It's still terminated for violating community guidelines. Unfortunately, like 30 different strikes. So I don't think they're ever going to give it back now. But liftingtheveil.tv, you can get it directly from there. It's just a hyperlink to Amazon. If you don't want to support Amazon, you can get it from basically any other online bookseller. Although getting it from Amazon is, it's the cheapest, and honestly, it's a better quality. Their print quality is actually, it looks nicer. The colors are a lot brighter and more vivid. And they have a hardback cover now, so that was cool. Before, they didn't have a hardback cover, but I get a hardback on there now. So that's what I really like. It's really cool. But yeah, you can get it directly from the website or Amazon itself. There's basic hyperlink you can follow at liftingtheveil.tv. You can just find it right there on the homepage.
That's what's up.
So yeah.
I'm curious, and you can briefly touch on this. How was the whole process of publishing, and was this difficult for you? You were talking a lot about, YouTube. I've seen on Facebook your posts over the years, people like, God damn it, they're sinking my ship, basically. And so it seems like you overcame that. You've got a book. Was this whole process kind of necessity is the mother of invention? You got to get these ideas out. Was it really difficult? Was it fun? Was it overwhelming? How did you look at the whole process on the publishing front?
Like all of my projects, it sort of just happened. I didn't even really intend for it. It's just one of the things, like I'm sort of like almost like subconsciously, autonomously creative. It's just what I do. Like it's just sort of on autopilot, and I just create these things sort of without even, it's just what I do. Like if I have free time, I'm never bored. I'm just going to automatically revert to, I'm going to just pump out some sort of like really interesting creative shit, because that's what I do in my free time. Is I'm just always learning new shit, because that's what's fun for me. So as I learn new things, I'm like, usually it's I see something or I'll hear something, and then my own mind sort of remixes things, and it's like I'll have an offshoot, and it's like, whoa, that's a huge revelation, and that connects to all these other things that I've seen somewhere along the way. And so that's sort of just how it happened. But yeah, it was fun putting it together. I mean, I basically already had the whole thing written, but again, when the WandaVision series show came out, that basically just had all the pieces that, you know, pushed me to be like, I got to include that in the book. And when I included it in the article, it just sort of turned into, you know, this big thing. And then I think I was just like, you know what, this is long enough. Why don't I just like try to format this article into and make it a book and, you know, put it on Amazon. I don't even know what, you know, compelled me to do that, but it's just, I think I just had sort of...
Don't question the muse. Just ride the lightning.
You know, I think it was people had been telling me, you know, you got to put out some books. You got to, you know, we got to get some actual physical media. You know, we got to get our hands on some of your stuff. So I think maybe there was that in the back of my mind, and I was like, you know, maybe I can put it out as a book. I don't know why, you know, I don't know why this was the first one I ever, you know, published. I guess just because it's like it's long enough and there is enough like really interesting stuff. And the hardest part is like it's almost all entirely visual, like it's all images and like whole page images, and of course a lot of it's like, you know, some corporate logos and you know, Bowie, Starman and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that could easily be like, you know, copyrighted shit. So that's the hardest part, is like, you know, I don't want to get sued for copyright or anything like that. So I had
fair use. At some point, I was thinking about that. Like DJs, at some point, it's like, this is my mix. I mean, yes, it's what you were saying earlier.
Just ask them where they got their letters from. You know, sue them back.
Yeah, I
just like you said initially, right?
Yeah, I do try to, you know, it is transformative fair use for the most part. There were a couple copyrighted images that I checked up on, and you know. And like he wanted me to license it out, so I was like, I'm not going to do this. So I just found an alternative, you know, found some other ways around it.
What
you know,
was the image that was going to have to be licensed?
It was a picture of a snowflake, of the geometry of the snowflake, which literally had the hexagonal, but it had the cube octahedron geometry on this. But I just looked up another. I mean, there's other images that are basically sort of Creative Commons images that I could use instead. But it was a really nice, I mean, high quality, high def picture of a, you know, snowflake crystal. But, you know, he obviously was... Is that my cat?
Yeah, I hear a cat.
I have a final bonus question. Any rabbit symbolism?
Rabbit symbolism? No, not in this one. Not in this book, but I do have some rabbit symbolism in my other presentations, like the one about Easter and the hare and the moon and the rabbit hole and some stuff like that. But yeah, I don't think there's. I don't recall.
You think you're going to make more
symbolism in this one?
Has this inspired you to like be like, all
right,
time to make
I mean, yeah. My intention is to, you know, put all of my articles, just reformat them into, you know, just put them out, even if they're not like. That's the thing, is I hold myself to like this standard of like, oh, to put it out as a book, it's got to be like a, you know, a big like 200 pages, and it's got to have all these chapters, and it's got to have the typical book structure. But then, you know, I think back and I'm like, well, no, I mean, Crowley just published like little pamphlets and, you know, and like a couple page things, and you know, there's way other different structures of the way I can, you know, put this stuff out. I mean, there's poetry books where, you know,
they don't even put any, bro. You know what I mean?
They don't even always. Yeah, I mean, there's art books. It's nothing but just pages of like sketches and stuff. So I mean, and some of these books of some of these guys' books of poetry, I'm like, dude, you just like slap together a bunch of crap, and you know, so yeah. But I just sort of have that like image of like, no, it needs to be like. But no, so I'm overcoming that and just be like, as all of my presentations are like, they're just sync pieces, you know. That's the hardest part, is knowing where it starts, how to start it off, and where it ends, because there is no beginning point and end point. It's all a circular, spherical, you know, wormhole thing that all connects to each other.
Like a drug trip.
That's the hardest part.
Always exists, and then you just get in and get out at various points.
That was actually one of the criticisms in like some of the reviews on Amazon. Like someone was like, "It's just it's just referencing is saying it doesn't go in depth on this thing, and it just references to some other work that he's." And I'm like, well, that's how the presentation was, and plus, like, if I go into depth on that, then that throws us off the whole thread of what this book is about. It's like I have to keep it on track, and that whole thing is a whole other separate rabbit hole book and presentation on itself that goes off into like a million other ones in that one. So it's like I have to separate them somewhere. You got to keep them separated somewhere. Otherwise, it's just like you have like a never-ending story, and it just you lose track of the theme of the book because it goes off into a whole other theme. And so it's like that's why it's like I mean. So I mean, I understand the criticism, but like it's just it's in the context of the actual work, like it's just invalid because it's like
those are the people who don't like Sgt. Pepper's or something like that. It's like this is too many choices. It's like fuck off. This is great. All right, so anyway, I really love having you on. We got to get you back on again for like a health and wellness maybe thing, and go deep down that because you're into it, and I would love to glean anything I could off you. Whether you want to do that solo or with others, we'll chat about. But we'll make it more than every 2 years or whatever. We'll get you back on the next 3 months or less, probably.
Yeah, so, I'm supposed to do a podcast with Francesco Sani. He's one of like the natural law, like Mark Passio guys, and he has a podcast. He wanted me to get on with him and Nathan Riddett. I think to specifically do like veganism myths and stuff. So many of them, especially low carb and myths about carnivore diets and all that stuff. So they wanted me to debunk a lot of that stuff. So
we'll probably glean from those notes. So when you do that, send me the link or whatever, and I'll check it out, and then I won't ask the same goddamn questions. But I'm fascinated with your idea on health, wellness, what it means to be a pristine star man or woman or whatever Baphomet thing we are, riddle of the Sphinx.
Star
Baphomet. Star Baff. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on. I love you, dude. We're hoping the best for you in this publication. I will definitely check it out. Any parting thoughts? Like last epitaph or whatever?
No, not really, because if I get on that, then it'll be like another 30 minutes or something. So
touche.
Let's just
guys,
wrap it up there. I think I've got out everything I
wanted to. Quintessential Team Rabbit Hole. This is what the fuck it is. This is why I even made the whole thing. People like you inspired me to go, there's a lot out here, and how do we even navigate these oceans of thought? So hats off to you. And guys, further up and further fucking in. This is how this works. So let's just enjoy the ride and try to illumine each other along the way home.
Nice. See you guys later.